All right. Picking up where we left off, the next one that we're going to have to really deal with here is going to be our beginning inventory. Our beginning inventory is going to be 0 for January since this is the first month of operations. And then for mahogany and oak, obviously our ending inventory for last month is going to be this month's beginning. All right, now once we have our direct materials needs, and then we minus out whatever we already had at the beginning of the month, that tells us exactly how much in direct materials we need to be purchasing. Very similar to when we did the production budget. And now since we want to turn this into monetary units, we're going to have to figure out the cost per foot. So since we need 5,323,800 feet of mahogany, and the mahogany costs $5 per foot, we can simply multiply that through to find the total cost that we expect to spend on mahogany during that month. Now for our oak, our problem says that oak is going to cost us $4.50 per foot. So we can fill that in. And then let's simply drag it across to figure out exactly what our costs are going to be. All right, now that we have our costs for each month, let's not forget about that total column, just in case we want to know the total for the quarter. So obviously our 3 months added together for units to be produced is going to give us our total. This does match on our production budget. These are going to stay the same because it does tell us how much we're going to need per unit. However, this one is going to be based on the total, so you will notice that it ends up being these 3 added up. Now, when it comes to our desired ending inventory, this is where I do see usually some mistakes, but there's really 2 ways to do it. When we're doing the quarter, technically, the desired ending inventory is on based on the final month. I'm going to go ahead and total it up in this one just because we actually see it both ways depending on the textbook you're using, which I know is a little silly. But technically our ending inventory should be the amount that is for the final month because obviously we can't have ending inventory in January and February. But this is the only way to do it to make the math to work out, flawlessly. But honestly, if you did it the other way, I really would not blame you. And keep in mind also, typically, you're not going to be writing these out on the exam, and you're going to be able to have your own preferences once you do enter the work field. All right. Well, I messed that up. Add. All right, same thing for beginning inventory. We typically would just focus on the beginning of the quarter. I kind of hate that I'm adding them up here. I don't know why. It just personally, it bothers me because it's technically not what the total quarter would be. But we're just going to ignore it, and I'm not going to be OCD about it. And keep in mind, if we're looking at this on a total quarter basis, we don't expect to begin the quarter with 40,250 of mahogany. We expect to begin the quarter with 0. So just so you kind of understand where I'm coming from there. And then $5 per foot of mahogany, $4.50 per foot of oak. Multiply it through, and then we see the total. And again, this total should match up to adding these 3 columns up. Let me see. What happened there? Oh, I was about to say that number looks way too tiny. Multiply. Oh, what am I doing? Yeah, let me just redo that entirely since I'm obviously way too tired. Okay. gosh. There's my mistake. Oh my goodness. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. I was about to say something is off there. I just don't know what. All right, that makes more sense. And that kind of shows you a critical component. I don't have the answers in front of me, but I'm looking at these numbers and I know that is just way too small for oak. So I hope as I was going through that you were catching that something weird was going on there, multiplying those. You know what? We're going to keep that mistake in there. I think that's a good, healthy one. I'm not truncating that. All right. So now that we have a good feel for our direct materials budget, let's get rid of that. We'll do it from scratch. Next, we're on to our direct labor budget. It is actually much, much easier than our direct materials budget. We're just going to be dealing with the standard months since we only have one type of labor. Whew. January, February, March, and a total. So when we're doing our direct labor budget, we're focused on the units to be produced, the direct labor time required per unit, total direct labor hours needed. That's what our result will be when we multiply those through. Then we will need to know the direct labor cost per unit. And then that will give us the total direct labor cost. So units to be produced, again, is going to be pulled from our production budget. So I'm going to actually pull that all the way through from up above. You'll notice those numbers should be very familiar. Now, the direct labor time required per unit, it says here that it takes 4 hours to produce one bookcase. So let's multiply the units that we plan to produce by the number of hours it takes for each one. There you go. That looks right. And now we want to turn this into monetary units. So we're going to need to know the pay amount. $12 per hour is what we pay our workers. All right, and then multiply that through. And that'll give us our direct labor cost. All right, that looks good. So that one's a nice, easy one. After that direct materials budget, I think anything will be a little bit easier, right? Delete. All right, the next one that we're going to be going to is our manufacturing overhead budget. Now, when it comes to our manufacturing overhead budget, this one isn't too bad either. For the most part, we're going to be copying over information from the problem. You'll notice we did direct materials, direct labor, and now it's time for manufacturing overhead. So we're going to be dealing with our first quarter again. And again, units to be produced. I'm going to grab this from our direct labor budget since this does not change. All right, and then we're going to separate this into two different areas based on cost behavior. So the first one is going to be our variable costs. And then below that, we will deal with our fixed costs. If I remember correctly, I think I want it on this line. We'll see. I don't like that line. I don't think it's supposed to be in there. Let's get rid of it real quick. I was about to say, oh good, it froze. All right. So according to our problem here, we have the following variable and fixed. Let's do variable first. We only have two variable. We have indirect materials, and then we have materials handling. Now our indirect materials are supposed to be 15 cents per unit. So 15 cents times the number of units to be produced. We're going to do that for each one. And then same thing for materials handling. That one says 35 cents per unit produced. And then simply add them up. And that will give us our totals. Now fixed costs. We have quite a few fixed costs. We have some supervisors' salaries, depreciation, rent, utilities, and other. Yeah, I don't know why that one line was in there. All right, so 22,000 for supervisor salaries, 20,000 for depreciation, 11,000 for rent, 6,000 for utilities, and then 12,000 for other. And then sum them up. And then for our total columns, add them all up. There we go. Ooh, rent. Whew. Let's fix that one. See, always take a look at what looks wrong. And this is going to be a big part of working on the exam and working quickly, is kind of looking at stuff and saying, well, that looks like an off number. Go. That looks much better. All right. Total variable costs. We have our total fixed costs. And then obviously if we add those two together, we have our total overhead costs. There we go. And add them all over. Ay. Don't like the way I did that. Give me a second. There we go. All right. And there's our overhead budget. Since our next one is going to be the budgeted cost of goods sold statement, I'm going to go ahead and end this video here, and then we'll go ahead and finish up with some financial statements.